morning.
Good morning. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
What a great group we have together this morning. Glad for those of you who are staying for formation and for folks who are contributing to our Seeking Shalom quilt. That's great. I'm so glad you're doing that. We are grateful to have Donnell Williamson back with us today. I'm going to do an introduction in just a second for those of you who haven't been here and enjoyed Donnell's class before. But before that, I want to just do a couple of housekeeping announcements. Next week, as Pam said before, next week we will be joining together to celebrate the completion of our successful stewardship campaign. The theme, as you all know, has been Seeking Shalom. And so we'll be taking a pause from formation to do that. If you haven't had an opportunity to return your pledge card, I encourage you to do that for a variety of reasons. Number one, pledging helps us to set our budget and to know how much we are able to contribute through our community engagement programs. And also, it helps us to bring in fantastic speakers like Donnell from the Candler Foundry. So 2 more good reasons to go ahead and complete that before next week. And then also in the next week, you all probably have received 1,000 text messages about this already, but I just want to say we also have the opportunity as people of faith to vote. And I hope you will take the opportunity to do that and pray about that and to vote your conscience. I am so grateful to welcome Donnell back today. Donnell is the Assistant Director for Community Programs, something like that. He's good with that. At the Candler Foundry, but a scholar and theologian in his own right. We talked about the fact a few weeks ago that he is getting ready to defend his dissertation sometime this fall, and we are so excited about that for him. So at this point, I'm going to invite Donnell to please open us with prayer, and then we'll get into the last in our series about the power of nonviolence. Donnell, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you so much for that introduction. Let us pray. Prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it. Seal it for thy course above. Heavenly Creator, we come first and foremost saying thank you. God, thank you for all that you have done for each and every one of us this week. Thank you for those things that you have yet to do. But God, most importantly, thank you for those things that you did not do. For the things that were coming to our way that could have hurt us, harmed us, God, that you stepped in and showed us mercy. And so, God, for that we say thank you. In Jesus' name we pray and ask it all. Amen. Amen. All right, here we are. Session 3. Kudos to the remnant who has decided to continue joining and journeying with us through this. I am so happy to be back. I heard last week you all spoke about Howard Thurman. What are some interesting things that you learned about Thurman? Intrigue me. I love Thurman. So another Morehouse man too, by the way.
You found a centering sort of contemplative life in nature.
Yeah. He was known to be a mystic.
A boat at night, and he had a special tree. Like to sit off to the tree.
Yeah, as a youth of Florida, he had that tree that he would go to and sit and study. I never had the chance to meet Thurman. He passed before I was born. But I know many people who were journeying with him and were students of his. And just a quick story, one of the coolest things that I ever heard is that he would take about 10 students out into like rural Georgia, right? And they would just journey together for a week, where all he would do he would come into the session with his shawl, because at this time he had cancer, and so he was living in his final days. So he would come in with his shawl, he would open a book, start reading it, close it, and then say, go and do the work, and just kind of leave them to like stay there for those 7 days to kind of study and work. I was like, that's a fantastic way to lead a class. I should just come in here, open a book, and say, now go and do the work. But I won't do that to you all today. But let's start with a Thurman meditation. We've been doing some breaths these other two sessions, but I want to start with a meditation from Thurman. It's one of my favorite. So let us reflect and kind of center ourselves as I read it to you. There is in every person an inward sea, and in that sea there is an island, and on that island is an altar. And standing guard before that altar is the angel with the flaming sword. Nothing can get by that angel to be placed upon that altar unless it has the mark of your inner authority. Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be a part of the fluid area of your consent. This is your crucial link with the eternal. Nothing passes the angel with the flaming sword to be placed upon your altar unless it be a part of the fluid area of your consent. What are we consenting to? Let us continue. So, where have we been, right? In the first session, I kind of asked why nonviolence, right? Responding to evil without becoming it, giving you an idea in the history of King's movement from Stride Toward Freedom, his first publication, and the story of the Montgomery movement, right? How did King end up in Montgomery? How did we arrive at this issue? In the second session, we talked about the 6 principles of nonviolence, the philosophy, how it worked, right? King really wanted to sit aside and kind of think about the philosophy that is driving the movement. I talked to you in the first session how King stated that the Sermon on the Mount was the driving force for this principle, for these 6 principles, this philosophy. But now we're going to talk about the tools, the steps. Think about the principles, the philosophy, right, as the wheel, right? Shaping the wheel, preparing the mind. And today we will talk about the steps, the tools, the action that needs to be done to really edify and amplify the philosophy. So we're going to look at what it looks like to live that philosophy in action. All right. So 2 weeks ago, I asked you to reflect on these 6 principles of nonviolence. And I wanted to ask you which one stood out most to you, which one was most challenging, which one was difficult for you to make sense of. And we heard a few responses, but I just wanted to know, in those 2 weeks, did you go home and meditate on these principles and something kind of popped out? Or when we left from one another 2 weeks ago, was there anything that stood out to you? Yes. Could you remind me of your name too, please?
Suzanne.
Suzanne, thank you.
Number 4.
Yes.
Because suffering is something I would like to avoid.
Yeah. Yes. I agree. I agree. And despite wanting to avoid it, isn't it ironic how Jesus calls us to it? How the gospel calls us to suffer, right? To bear our own cross, to turn the other cheek. I sometimes think about that Sermon on the Mount. I'm like, Jesus, not today, not today. There are other practical ways, Jesus. What else? What else stands out? Yes, Barbara?
Nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. And I don't know that I'm always ready to do that.
Thank you for sharing that. That is also hard to accept. Because sometimes we don't always see the issue, we see the person who's speaking on the issue, and that person becomes our enemy, right? And it's hard to kind of disaggregate, disentangle the two, the person and the issue, without wanting to be like, what's wrong with you, right? And then also to be like, I love you, I respect your humanity, I disagree with the hate you're spewing. Yeah, it's hard to do that. Yes.
I think that there are times when number 6 is a little hard to really believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
That
today and
takes,
all
that takes
days.
a lot of faith, yeah, to.
Yes. And we are people of faith, right? We are people of faith, but I mean, existentially, it's morbid, right? I mean, in this moment, if we just consider all the things that are happening, we're like, justice seems so far away. We can't even get to agreement, better yet, justice, right? So yes.
Well, in a sense, number 6, that perception motivates an understanding of number 2 and 3. I would say that 2 and 3 are really synonymous or symbiotic for one another, because if we have a friendship and understanding, then we understand that we are not trying to defeat people, but we are trying to defeat injustice.
Yeah.
And to do that, we need the communication that friendship and understanding will facilitate.
That's absolutely right. You are a Kingian nonviolent philosopher. That's exactly what it is, right? All of these are intricate. There's no ordering to them, right? There's a principle outline that we have listed, but no one says that 5 comes before 1 or 1 comes before 5, vice versa, right? They're all kind of, to your point, symbiotic. They're living together in meaningful ways, which is just hard to order them, 1, but then 2, not to see how they're connected, right? You have to love a friend. Love persons. You have to understand them. You have to build friendship. And I think 6-2 is important because you still have to remain faithful to the idea that justice is possible. Right? In the face of injustice, can you maintain the belief that justice is possible? That's hard to do. Yes.
I'll pipe in on there a couple of things. Probably the toughest for me personally is what 2 and 3 are saying. But it's a challenge for me to have that, to get to that a personal approach to, what's happening, trying to bridge the gulf.
Yes.
That is so wide and seems to be widening. An exercise that I'm always trying to do is find a point of sympathy with people that I disagree with. And I try to find that in proportion to how much I disagree with them.
Right.
So I'm really going to try. I'm trying real hard now, right? Real hard a lot. There was a wonderful book that was written right at the beginning when Trump was elected the first time. A sociologist went to South Louisiana, where I'm from, and was interested in one question: why do people vote against their self-interest?
Yeah.
Particularly, why do poor white people who have been riddled with cancer because of the oil industry, why do they vote for folks who represent the powers of industry often? And particularly she was interested, and she did a wonderful job. I would recommend the book as a way of understanding a lot if you feel very separate from your fellow white people, and how white people are coming to their rage right now. It answers it for South Louisiana, but I think it has other general applications, because what she found was there was a sense of injustice among, and there is still a sense of injustice among the people that we have issues with. They feel like justice has been broken. They feel like they've been dealt with unjustly. And the one thing that comes out was they feel like they were skipped in line.
Yeah.
That's the feeling. And everyone can relate to that feeling. They were skipped in line. Wrong or right, there's some justification, some of the feelings there, but I try to get to those points of sympathy where I know how that feels to be skipped in line, but that they're carrying that and they're freighted with that gives emotional power behind things we don't understand why they have emotional power now, because it's not going away.
That's right.
And it's very real. People feel like they've been slighted and they're carrying that, and that has an incredible strength. And how do you engage a feeling of injustice with a feeling injustice and meet injustice.
Yeah.
And it's about that sympathy that's very hard to come to, but I always try to, when I'm faced with an issue, how do I have something to understand what it feels slighted by to get to that rage?
Yeah.
Because I feel slighted all the time.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll just pipe in with number 6, the most powerful thing I ever heard MLK say was later on, after I learned so much about the civil rights movement, and it was that civil disobedience that's nonviolent presents a presentation of an order that's better than the order it's seeking to transplant.
Yeah.
And that people serve order, and the whole purpose of the movement was so people could be shown a better way. And the faith was that people, when shown, one person shooting a water hose at a child will be able to understand very clearly that order is bad,
Yeah.
and this order is more civil.
That's right.
It's just more civil.
That's right.
This is a better way. And that's a very simple, bold, goal of the civil rights movement that gets to number 6, because it's when you see that side by side, when you see people disobeying civilly nonviolent, that is higher order. So anyway.
I appreciate that. What's your name?
Brandon.
Brandon. Thank you. No, you hit on a few things that we're about to discuss. Absolutely.
Sorry.
And no. But you did exactly what King and others would have wanted us to do, which is to look at this philosophy and begin to think about the practices. And that's exactly where we're going, right? How do we make this now practical? And so when we see someone who we disagree with, I like that idea of I want to try to have as much sympathy for them as my disagreement is against them, right? And so yes, absolutely, 100%. So let me say something else about this before we move forward. Actually, no, let's keep going. So we started in Birmingham the last session, and I want us to kind of bridge the gap. How do we get from Birmingham to Selma? We're going to continue this session thinking about Selma and the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as many of you might be familiar with, and thinking about how the philosophy now comes into play after Birmingham. So last session, we were focusing on the letter from a Birmingham jail. King had written that letter to those clergymen who were telling him, turn down the temperature. There are other ways. We don't need to protest. We don't need to demonstrate. And King says, I disagree. We do need to demonstrate. We do need to protest, because that's how you make an actual change. And so we started in 1963 with the letter from a Birmingham jail. And then May of 1963, just what Brandon was telling us, we get to the Children's Crusade, and that should be truce, not truck, without a K. We get to the Birmingham Truce, right? And the Children's Crusade, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few, is when Dr. King, after having been arrested in Birmingham, decided, that we need to then consider another method for protesting. Most of the adults had ran out of money. Remember, they're already putting in all of their good energy, trying to protest certain by doing sit-ins and marches and things, bailing themselves out of jail. They don't have any more money. And so one activist then decides, let's use the children, right? And so they train the children in nonviolence, and they send them out into Bull Connors, Birmingham, right? And so we'll see what that looks like shortly. After that, we have the split screen, as Brandon discussed, right? On one side, you see the children who are being watered, hosed down, and the dogs and animals are being, ripping through their skin. And then on the other side, you then begin to wonder, why is this happening? And so white business leaders and white civic leaders decided, let's put an end to this. And they sat down with the SCLC and other people in Birmingham to come to a truce. But that truce only lasted a few months, because in September 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed. And 4 young black girls were in their Sunday's best, playing around in the church, and were killed, annihilated. by the dynamite that we had spoken about in the last session that had been used so much throughout Alabama, right? And so these individuals were upset that Birmingham had agreed and this truce had come to terms that they wanted to then kind of take their own power back. So November 1963, keep moving, JFK is assassinated. And so at this time, JFK did a lot to try to help Dr. King and other civil rights activists kind of push the ball forward, if you will. But then he is met with his own fatality. And so this now brings a whole new situation to light. In July 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson, after having discussed some things with King, decides to sit down and sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, the Civil Rights Act solely was to prevent segregation in public spaces like in Birmingham, Selma, and other places, Montgomery, right? But that did not necessarily work in Selma. Just because the law was signed, they didn't feel as if they had to abide by it. And so they continued things as usual. During this time in Selma, in Dallas County, there were only 2% of black citizens, 2%, not 2% of the population. 2% of the black citizens within Dallas County were registered to vote. 2%. And that was after years of Amelia Bolton and John Lewis, right, and others leading the march and trying to get people registered to vote. Despite that effort, only 2% of them were ever registered. So here's an image from the Children's Crusade. As you see, a young man is protesting, walking, and the dogs are unleashed on him. And the question is to kind of pull us back to that nonviolence philosophy, right? Number 4, is suffering redemptive, right? Can nonviolent suffering change the laws of this nation? And the interesting part is that King thinks it can. King believes that nonviolent suffering is necessary in order to change the laws and the ways that this nation operates. I'm showing you these images in trying to kind of point this out because it is important to know that King believed in nonviolence, but he used violence done by the system and those who purported it to then subvert their idea of what it meant to be nonviolent. So King himself did not use violence, right? But he wanted to shine a spotlight on those who use violence. So a part of his nonviolent strategy was to point out that there was a violent system, right? And so this is a part of what's happening. And that's why redemptive suffering for him is important, because his whole mission was to highlight the violence that was happening in the country at the time. So here's a word. What comes to mind when you see this word?
Violence.
Violence.
Power.
Power. I like that. Thank you. Yeah. Struggle. I like that too.
Fighting.
Fighting? Yes, yes.
Noise.
Once more?
Noise.
Noise. Could you say more?
Just, bashing it, you know.
Oh, okay.
Fans bashing against
Gotcha.
each other and,
Okay. Yes.
Misunderstanding.
Yes. That's very critical.
anxiety,
Anxiety.
which is what I was thinking when you said noise, like just lack of clarity.
Yeah.
Two sides.
Now, what happens when we see this word? What comes to mind?
Surrender. Compassion.
Calm.
Calm, compassion, surrender. Yes.
Lack of violence is the obvious.
Yeah. Lack of violence.
But not peace at any cost, not that passive aggressive peace.
Yeah. Yeah. No passive aggressiveness. No passive aggressiveness.
Communication.
Communication. Yeah.
Collaboration.
Collaboration.
Ocean waves.
Once more.
Ocean waves.
Ocean
First
waves.
thing that I heard.
I love this sonic feature that's coming from you. I'm just in this space with you. Absolutely. Ocean wave. The calm sereneness of the ocean, right? Yeah. Still noise, though. Still
Yeah,
noise.
yes, exactly.
It's rhythmic. It's not.
Rhythmic.
Except the storm.
Yeah. It's synchronous, too, right? There's some synchronicity happening with the waves and the rhythms.
There's societal peace and then there's inner peace.
Ah, there's different types of peace.
And they obviously connect.
Yeah. Now, are there different types of conflict?
There can be peaceful conflict. This argument is conflict.
Yeah.
I would argue that King saw two sides to conflict. He saw escalation and he also saw de-escalation, right? And there were moments for each, right? Escalation was oftentimes necessary. Children's Crusade, the Selma March, other various conflicts, right? And then there was de-escalation. The letter from a Birmingham jail, right, is a form of de-escalation. Negotiating with those who are on the other side of the table by having a conversation and communicating, as you said in the back earlier, right? There are two sides of conflict, but we have to be honest with ourselves to know that there are two sides and that conflict is also necessary, right? What King is saying is that conflict doesn't just look one way. It's not solely always about protests being in the streets, right? There are other ways of conflict, and it requires those who are nonviolence minded, right, to embrace conflict in order to end injustice. Right? So here we are at the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And King is standing behind LBJ as he signs this act again to end segregation in public spaces. And despite having ended it, as I stated earlier, Selma is still trying to make sense of its own issues. And so out of it, King creates these four, he starts with four, right? Practical steps for nonviolence. Anyone knows who created the other two? Pop quiz.
John Lewis.
That's a good guess, but no, not John Lewis.
Howard Thurman.
Yeah, that's also a good guess. No. No. Who started the civil rights movement? Remember in session one? The women. The women started the movement. And as I stated then, and I want to reaffirm now, there would be no civil rights movement without the women, and there would be no Dr. King without Mrs. Coretta Scott King. It was Coretta Scott King who came up with these 6 practical steps, borrowing 4 of them from what Dr. King had already laid out in a letter from a Birmingham jail, but she added 2 because she realized that you had to start somewhere, right? Information gathering was the first one that she added. Information gathering is about understanding the problem and its full moral, social, and political context. So whenever you're trying to bring about some form of justice, it's important to start with research, right? We need to know what the problem is and how to fully understand the problem, right? We need to know who our opponent is, as Brenda was saying earlier, right? And how to best sympathize with them in some particular way. This is a picture of Hosea Williams as he was working for the SCLC, researching every aspect of the issue, right? What are the facts? What's the history? What are the various sides on the issue, right? What are the policies? Who are the people that are involved? And who were the people involved, right, historically? And then also listening deeply. All of those who have been mostly affected, we have to listen to the ways that they've been affected. I probably shared this with you already, but one of my favorite quotes when I'm talking about justice is that I like to think about justice the way that my grandmother kind of taught me justice. Now, she didn't sit me down and say, hey, Donnell, this is justice, right? But what she did is that every Sunday after church, she would open up her kitchen. There would be people from church who would come over and have dinner. People who were in our neighborhood who had meals sent to them, and we would leave them in those little Winn-Dixie bags. Y'all don't know about Winn-Dixie, do you? The styrofoam plates stacked on top of each other, wrapped in aluminum foil, tied in a Winn-Dixie bag. Hey, go drop this off to Miss Barbara. Go drop this off to Mr. Peter, right? To express the welcoming and the opening of our table. For me, that always looked like justice. But then I think about justice now, and oftentimes how justice is about having a seat at the table, right? But having a seat at the table isn't always the same if the menu has already been pre-selected. To sit at the table with the pre-selected menu does not give you an opportunity to voice your opinion or your sides, right? And so listening to those who have been mostly affected is always one of the first critical steps for nonviolence. Because if we're only talking from our own perspective, then we're bringing our egos, our self-interest, our things, right? And we don't know what the people on the ground want. And so as Brandon pointed out earlier, Brandon, I'm gonna keep using you because you just laid this out so beautifully already, is that there are people who are going to continue to feel as if they were slighted because their voices and their concerns have not been heard, right? One of the beautiful things about Dr. King's movement, as it kind of came to a climactic point, if you will, in Memphis, was that he was there for the poor people, right? It was the poor people's campaign. And he was wanting to walk along sanitation workers, black, white, other, right? Who were fighting for their rights, fighting for their place in society, fighting for better wages, fighting for equal rights. He was standing in the gap for those persons. And so it's not always about our own issues, right? Nonviolence or simply about trying to vote, right? King develops over time, and he still uses these nonviolent steps and philosophy to match those moments. One of the most important questions I have to always ask when I'm thinking about this step is, what do I know and what am I assuming, right? It's critical. You have to kind of separate between what you know and what you assume about a situation. Oftentimes we assume that because someone is living on the street that they need housing, right? Or oftentimes we assume because we see someone standing at a gas station asking us for money that they need food, right? That might not be what they need. And as all of you who live in Atlanta, I'm quite sure you're abreast on that conversation. You know that there are other needs and interests, but we can't assume that we know what one needs without first gathering the information. The second step is education. And this was another critical piece that Mrs. King thought to add. And another key component of all of what Mrs. King did was that without her work, we would not now have the Martin Luther King Jr. papers and the collection at Stanford and at the AUC Woodruff Library, because for her, education was critical. She wanted to amass as much information as possible on the life and legacy of her husband and ensure that she was able to share that with everyone widely, right? So education is about sharing knowledge broadly and clearly to build understanding before confrontation, right? Sometimes we like to just kind of put on our marching boots and get out in the streets and say, I have a problem, I demand justice, right? But we always don't fully know both sides of the story or the policies that's shaping the issue, right? So education is critical. We have to inform both supporters and opponents, replace rumor with relationship, replace blame with clarity. Right? Communication is what we use. That is our main tool to persuade, not attack. We don't want to attack the individual. We have to separate the person in the issue because we want to increase sympathy instead of shaming folks. We all know what it feels like to be shamed, right? I'm sure. We've had our fair share of experiences, and it doesn't feel good. And oftentimes when people are shamed, they just kind of double down, right? They don't necessarily feel open to changing or open to conversation. They just kind of stick their boots in the ground and say, hey, if you don't like it, it's my way or the highway, Jack. Figure it out or get along, right? And we have to figure out the difference between the two. To think about this in the context of Selma, again, I told you that Selma had 2% of registered Black voters at the time. And in addition to this, one of the things that they were doing before leading to the march on the bridge, right, from Selma to Montgomery, because it was a 54-mile march, right? They wanted to march from Selma to Montgomery to, one, prove the importance of registering black voters, and also to enforce, if you will, this voting rights, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Selma protest is how we get to the Voting Rights Act. That was a Freudian slip for me, but the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is what they were hoping to enforce. And so a lot of the issues that individuals were running into when they were registering to vote were things like literacy tests, right? Constitutional rights. There would be a jar of jelly beans sitting on the table, and they would ask someone to guess how many jelly beans are in the jar in order for you to register to vote, right? In addition to all of the other types of tests that were, imposed on individuals so that they could just have the simple right to exercise, or the simple ability to exercise their rights. This is a quick video that I want to show you just about how we get to Selma and also what's coming out of Birmingham.
Luther King's nonviolent movement was inspired by the teachings of Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi. Throughout the South, King put the spotlight on prejudice.
Mississippi is a state that has consistently resisted any move to rid itself of racism.
Led by King, millions of blacks took to the streets for peaceful protest, as well as civil disobedience actions and economic boycotts.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
The nonviolent movement was tested in places like Birmingham, Alabama. William Bell is the city's current mayor.
During that period of time, you had people who were being murdered, homes being bombed, churches being bombed, and there was a sense that nothing would ever change here in Birmingham or the South. There was a sense that evil would prevail.
In 1965, a march for voting rights in Selma, Alabama went down in history as Bloody Sunday. Congressman John Lewis led the march.
They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, shrimping us with horses, releasing tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. I had a concussion at the bridge. I thought I was going to die.
Andrew Young, one of King's closest aides, called for calm against a backdrop of outrage.
And if we had started guerrilla warfare in America's cities, if we had given in to terrorism, we could not have won, but America could not have survived.
I want to stop there for the sake of time. So sorry. I know that was unpleasant. But what you see is John Lewis, rest in peace, who is speaking about his own experience. And I don't know if any of you ever paid attention to John Lewis's forehead, but he still had the bruise from when he was hit with the bully club on his forehead till he died, right? That Selma March changed his entire life trajectory. Now, granted, I think he would always went on to do great things, but it really impassioned him to eventually run for Congress, right? The third step here is ground yourself spiritually and ethically for the long work ahead, right? We talked about how the philosophy came out of the Sermon on the Mount, and the spiritual and emotional and mental practices were so critical to King, right? King wanted people to first examine their motives, right? You need to kind of first understand where you stand in order to help somebody else, right? If you know that you get quite heated when somebody brings an injustice to you, you might not be the person who goes to meet with Bull Connor to try to negotiate with him and push him to see your point of view, right? So you just have to know where you stand. Recommit yourself to philosophy of nonviolence daily. I like to think about this portion as when Paul says, I die daily, right? Having to let go and deny oneself and renounce one's self-interest and all the things that comes along with it. But most importantly, the method is the message. Again, King wants to spotlight violence, right? And he's showing the world how violent this system is. It's not solely about segregation. It's not solely about denying people the right to vote. It's a violent system that responds violently. And we have to do something about that. The fourth step is negotiation. And so King thinks that we should seek honest dialogue to resolve injustice before resorting to direct action. Before ever stepping foot in the street, you should first have made an attempt to meet with someone, to talk with them, to try to get them to understand your point of view, because that is critical. Communication is critical. And so here's a picture of C.T. Vivian and Sheriff Jim Clark at the courthouse in Selma. And Sheriff Jim Clark is the one who's going to be standing at the end of the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday with his troops, right? And commanding them to go and charge the protesters. And so C.T. Vivian is trying to persuade him and tell him, hey, we don't have to do this, right? Let people register to vote. Let them vote, give them the right, let them come in, because at the courthouse at this time is where they would go and register. Let them come in and exercise their constitutional right. And as you can imagine, Jim Clark did not budge, and hence why it was necessary for the protests. One of the other key components that King mentions in Why We Can't Wait, he says that negotiation is a moral invitation, right? To negotiate with someone is an invitation to invite them to have a moral and ethical conversation about what the stakes are, what's happening, what's currently going on. Now, if all things fail, right? If you're unable to move the needle with negotiation, then direct action is the next step, right? And this is an opportunity to create constructive, visible tension that demands resolution. And so you see here young John Lewis and Hosea Williams, and behind them is Amelia Bolton walking 2 by 2 across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right? Direct action for King is only used when negotiation fails or stalls. The idea is that you want to escalate moral tension between both sides. It's not for you to provoke in the sense of being violent, right? You don't want to go and get in front of Bull Connor or Jim Clark's face and kind of, start pointing a finger and yelling at them per se, but you want to demonstrate that we have an interest and we want our interest to be heard. It's about testimony, it's about suffering, it's about endurance. But the critical piece for direct action is that it works to expose evil systems. That is the goal. And so on March 7, 1965, this is a picture of John Lewis being beat by that billy club. It's just always heartbreaking to see this image. But John Lewis and others walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on that day after for months having tried to negotiate and trying to come to the table to get some kind of, motion, some type of agreement that Black people could register to vote. And their idea was that they would march from Selma to Montgomery to see Governor Wallace and to tell Governor Wallace that it was important and that all these people were also in agreement in showing that they thought the right to vote was a sacred right that they should have. And so as they went across that bridge on that Sunday, they had left the Brown Chapel AME Church, which wasn't far from Edmund Pettus Bridge, planning to walk 54 miles. They probably only got 0.8 miles. Got across the bridge, met with Jim Clark's troops, and struck violently. King at the time was in Atlanta. This was on First Sunday, as you can imagine. First Sunday is very crucial for Baptist churches because that's when they do communion. So King was in Atlanta doing communion. He hears about it and decides that he's going to go to Selma to lead another protest, right? And so King also gathers about 2,000 people now. They walk the Edmund Pettus Bridge And as he got to the top of the bridge, he saw that the same group of troops were waiting on the other side. And he realized that that was not the time to do direct action the way that he wanted to do it at that moment. He decided to de-escalate instead of escalating the conflict, right? And so King turned around. Now, people might ask, why did King turn around? Now, granted, there were a lot of people who were upset when King decided to take a knee to pray and then turn the entire group around, all 2,000 persons, and walk back to Brown Chapel. The reason why this is important, however, is because a month before King decides to lead this protest, Malcolm X was assassinated, right, in February of 1965. A few months before that, JFK was assassinated. And King had a moral moment as he stood on the top of that bridge. Do I walk these people, having seen what happened at the Children's Crusade in Birmingham? And please believe, people were angry with King after having those water hoses and dogs put on those children, right? Do I walk back into that same situation? And instead, he decided to turn around. So after all this has happened, again, it's not linear. It doesn't always happen that way. But the goal is reconciliation, that you'll restore relationships and build the beloved community. Remembering that the enemy is not the individual, but injustice. The enemy is injustice. The goal is justice, right? That victory without reconciliation is only half a win. King thinks that despite having acquired a lot of wins, he always consistently was trying to meet with people to change the hearts of women and men, right? Because he knew that the legislative piece, the judicial piece, those were helpful, but that would not change the overall tenor of the communities and the societies in which people lived, right? People, they had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but there still was segregation. There was still a denial of the voter's box, right? So I sped through this a bit quickly because I realized we're out of time. So thank you for being gracious and sticking alongside of me as we wrap this up. But these are the 6 steps. And so what I would now ask you is to consider which of the 6 steps could you take first to escalate truth and de-escalate harm, right? Think about this as you are considering building your social justice ministry and network, community. What is it called, Carmi? The
Social Justice Action Group.
Action Group. I said ministry committee group. Social Justice Action Group. And what steps you might take, right? Where do you start? I would say information gathering and education is very important. And what work has already been done? As a young person, I oftentimes walk into situations thinking that I know a lot, right? I assume that I know both sides of the issue, but I've learned so much from my elders. And being in conversation with them is oftentimes more resourceful than any book or anything that anyone else could give you outside of a living being, right? People are libraries in themselves, right? To have conversations with your elders to understand all sides of the issue. So as we wrap this up, I know it's hard to not think doom and gloom, right? What do we do? What can we do? I first say, what can we do? We tell the truth, no matter the cost. Always tell the truth, right? Practice peace. We're in the church, yes, but having practices, prayer practices. Julie and I were talking about knitting practices earlier, right? Practices that helps kind of relieve the anxiety and lower the temperature within yourself, right? This is back to that personal commitment piece. You have to know and take inventory of where you are. If you have a lot of things going on, it's hard for you to show up for somebody else. So know where you are, practice those habits that help you to become a better person. Build relationships that humanize, right? We always want to focus on an individual's humanity. Although we disagree with the issue, right, or on the issue, it's best for us to focus on that individual and not solely the issue. The person is not the thing that we hate, right? We despise the way that they're spewing hate or the issue that is hateful, right? And then fourth, confront injustice with courage and discipline, and then turn moments of harm into spaces for healing. Because the beloved community is when we know that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. Only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. I mean, you could possibly, find the stairs if you've been in the house before. Possibly. But the stars is what's illuminating the sky, even when it's dark, right? And I'm from a rural place in North Carolina, Shelby, North Carolina, if anybody's from Western North Carolina. And I love when I go home because I can look in the sky and literally see the sky and skyline and the stars. I love Atlanta, but there's nothing like looking at the stars at night. So what's giving you light? Where are you? What are you fighting for? What are you standing up for? Who are you standing alongside of? How are you choosing to walk in this moment? Because it's not solely about how we respond, but it's really about who we are becoming. Because if we become the type of people who believe in justice, I truly believe that justice will soon be attained. Thank y'all. Last thing, I would get in trouble for being the assistant director of the Foundry if I didn't say this, because this is my job, and to tell everybody else to do this. But please scan this QR code if you want to stay in contact. On this QR code, you'll receive some information, and we'll love to just keep in contact with you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking Donnell again for being not only our teacher, but our companion in this really important education piece on our journey toward nonviolence. You have just been such a gift to this community, and we really appreciate the relationship, the time that you've spent with us. Okay, so 3 important pieces of information. Please do fill this out. This helps the Foundry as they're building new programs and thinking about what's coming up. Also, just a great way to keep in touch. They send out wonderful resources from time to time about programs that are coming up. If you like this, there's always more going on through their courses in the community program. The second thing I will do one more time is encourage you to use this time coming up to exercise your constitutional right for early voting. And then also in 2 weeks, plan to come back and join us starting on November the 9th. Jacob Barber is going to be teaching a class called Beyond Welcome, which focuses on Karen Gonzalez's work that's sort of at the intersection of our Christian witness and welcoming, providing hospitality to those who are strangers. So please mark your calendar for that. And thank you so much for your time today. I think that's it. Thank you, Donna.